Hey guys, I've made some changes to our Smaart software that I've shown you, but I've also thought that I'd take this as an opportunity to talk about levels altogether in a bit more detail. Maybe this might be a touch more of a geeky video, but I do hope you'll watch the whole thing and pay attention. There's lots of good stuff to learn here. So first, before we get into anything else, levels at churches can be a problem. It's been a problem for years that any church I've talked to, people I know, or online forums I've seen, every single church faces this problem that some people in your church are always going to think it's too loud, and some people in church are always going to think it's too quiet. It's hard to please everybody. But we've been very thoughtful and prayerful and with experience trying to determine what level we want at Church of the Rock. And with conversations with our pastors, with Derek over the years, and with Chuck, we've come up that we want our peak level during worship to be 90 decibels, and it's called decibel SPL, sound pressure level. That's when you're talking about decibels that refer to physical volume of sound in a room. And we're going to use decibel dBA. I'm going to get into more detail about that in a second. But just more thought behind that. What we want the level to be, we want the level to be impactful and engaging and something people can sing with and enjoy. But we want it to be something that they can feel is not overwhelming their hearing. It's not going to be too sharp or too harsh for their ears. It's also going to be something where it's loud enough that people feel like they're not going to have everyone around them hear what they're singing exactly, because a lot of people are insecure about their singing. But it's not so loud that makes people check out like it's a concert or feel abrasive or offensive in any kind of a way. So we do find that 90 decibel dBA peak does sort of reach that. So you're averaging around 85, 83-ish maybe, and you peak up to around 90. And we find that's kind of the sweet spot where it's loud enough to be engaging, but not so loud that it's offensive or makes people check out. And so we're going to go into a few more tools about how we make sure we get there and ways to measure it and a few different things. And a few updates I made to the software as well while we are at it. So let's look at the software quickly. This is our Smaart software that we have. We've been using it for a while, and we've always had one mic on it. But I've added two more mics, so we have one mic here. And then I added a mic over there, and that's the mic to get the outside of the room. And I've also added a mic way over there. And this mic is to measure somewhat close to how the pastors hear it, also just to be a bit more forward and a bit more on this side of the room. So we're trying to cover all of our bases. Let's go back to the mixing console. We're doing this just to try to give ourselves a better picture of how loud it is and how it sounds in different parts of the room. And so we're using the Smaart software, but you'll notice on here now that we have front of house, mic 1 front of house, mic 2 camera, and mic 3 pole. I've also added this mic 3 average. This is only for the spectrograph and the RTA and the spectrograph, but the average is the average of the 3 mics. But if you go to the SPL tab, now we have a lot more detail where we get all 3 mics and which SPL we're getting exactly at those mics. Now you see that mic 1 is looking louder. It's because we're talking close in front of it. So that's why definitely it affects it. But if I get quiet for a second, they're all pretty much the same, but there are some small differences between the two, especially when we get something going. Right now, this is an empty room. So that's one of the things we've added. And so one thing we've been wanting to do now is we've been wanting to log all of our SPL. So what I've done now is I've started the logging, and basically if you don't stop it, so I'm asking you guys not to stop the logging, every time you turn it on, it's just going to automatically log the SPL the whole time you're there. So it just keeps track of the SPL. While you're having a service or rehearsal or anything. And then when you close it again, it actually closes up the file and it makes a new file next time you start one. So basically, as long as you don't ever hit this stop logging, as long as you never hit that, this will keep on running. And if you go back, so you might not even need to go into this tab if you don't want to at all. You can stay in this real time. But then to start all these spectrograph and RTAs again, hit the play button now for everything, and they all should start. And that's where you get the different colors for each different mic. And if you want to, you can highlight the different mics out front. So if you want to take a more closer look at the camera, you hit cam, and now you see the blue one is out front. And see how it's a little bit different frequency response, and a little bit different level, especially because we're closer to the other mics. And if you want to look at the average, you can do that as well. And so that also goes with the spectrograph. So this should be a bit of a help knowing how it sounds at our different positions. One other thing I've added is there's this extra little tab now if you have this on a second screen, so you can always have this available even if other things are in front of the Smaart software. We have this bar, so that shows the 3 different mic positions and their SPL levels. All right, so I'm going to get into a bit more detail about the different SPL filtering. So I've mentioned briefly that we want to peak at 90 decibel dBA. So again, that's sound pressure level dBA. And so on the software, you have lots of different options, but basically, decibel SPL is sound pressure level, how much sound pressure is in the air. So this is referring, a decibel is referring to sound literally in the air that you can hear. And then the A refers to a filter type, and the fast refers to that's picking it up quickly. So on this software, it's very advanced. There's actually this whole load of different ways you can look at it. But the main ways that people measure these things, and if you remember our old dB meter, it's A and C are the main options, and fast and slow was only options we had. So the main difference between the two different SPL types that are A and C is that they're different filterings. So I'm going to give you a little graphic that's going to show this, but basically, our human ears don't hear things perfectly evenly. We don't hear every frequency perfectly evenly, even if we have perfect hearing. This is the way God's designed the human ear, is that we hear certain frequencies, we're more sensitive to certain frequencies than others. And so every human has a roughly same curve. Now with hearing loss, it of course changes with people. But if a perfectly healthy ear, almost everybody has the almost identical curve. And the way this works is that if you look at decibels and you had no filtering at all, you would get levels that are technically correct. It is the sound pressure in the air, but it's not what people would perceive as humans. We perceive a different level. So there's a little bit of debate around this, but people say that the SPL dBA is more closer to human hearing at levels beneath 95 dB. And then beyond 95 and up, people say that dBc is more accurate. And apparently there's a little bit of debate over that topic, but most people would agree on that point. So that if you have that dBA filter on, what it does, it gets rid of more low end, and then it gets the dB measurement with more low end pulled out of it. So that if we're hearing frequencies at 90 dBA, you'll get a much higher reading at dBc, especially if you go to one that is like instantaneous, not just slow or fast, because how fast the decibel is picking it up. Because our ears will pick up fast, but our ears don't pick up instantaneously either. So we've just found that anyway, even if this is not the exactly perfect filter system we should use, if we use dBA at 90 dBA peak, that's the level that we have as a church agreed on. This is what we think is a good, comfortable level that's loud enough to be energetic, but not to damage anybody's hearing. And so we think this is going to be a good level to work on. So basically in practice, when we're mixing on a weekend, you want to be mixing so that the very loudest parts of your songs are peaking at that 90 decibel dBA. And so if there's the occasional little spike above, that seems to, once in a while, things will just quickly spike on you. But you want to be mostly not seeing above that 90 decibels dBA. If you see the occasional 92 or whatever, if you're seeing beyond that, it means you're too loud. So what this usually means is that if there's a quieter part of the song, you need to actually start with your mix at a bit of a lower level. It could be in those low 80s to mid 80 numbers. And then as the song builds up, you'll get closer to that 90. And I usually mitigate this a bit, like of course with my mixing overall, but if I use the DCAs, then you can take, if you're especially doing rehearsal, realizing that the louder part of your song got too loud, I take all my DCAs down a touch and then start from there. And then so basically when it gets to the louder part of the song, that's when you hit that 90. So you always want to have a little bit of that room, especially between the verses and the choruses. And every so often someone will surprise you by just blasting really loud and out of your control, but that should be more infrequent and occasional. If we're seeing beyond that 90 too much or too long, that's when you're going to start having people it's bothering their hearing. And some people have really legitimate hearing problems, and so anything above those levels really starts to bother them. Some people it's just more of a preference thing. But the fact is that either way, we want to be trying to hit that number as much as consistently as possible. But also it is important that we do get to that number. Mixing too quiet isn't great either. If you're never seeing 90, you're actually mixing too quiet. Now that's a more rare problem, but every so often someone will mix a little too quiet. And so we want to make sure we are getting up to that 90 at the loud parts of the songs, but we're not getting beyond it, or if at all, just very occasionally. So that's the main stuff I want to talk about today. This is a very complex topic, but I really think it's worth thinking through it thoroughly, talking about it, being exactly what we've arrived at and why we've arrived at it. Because I know this has caused definitely some tension in me. I've had times in the past where people have come to me angrily because they thought it was too loud. Other people had hearing impairments and they either thought it was too loud or too quiet. And trying to work with people on different parts of the room sound slightly differently. We always want to have kindness and care with people come to us, but we want to make sure that we're thinking it through and being thoughtful as well. Like I've talked about in some of our training too, if anybody comes to you and tells you it's too loud, you wouldn't just go right away turn it down. you want to make sure that you are following these guidelines we talked about. But if someone like a pastor or a worship leader comes up to you, or one of the tech leaders, this is where we want to have that, always being willing to receive input that I myself still receive to this day. And being willing to take all that on, and being willing to take it down a little bit, even though we might like a bit more energy. The fact is that that's what we need to hit for this room. And we're here to serve the team. The main thing is we're trying to honor God. We're trying to help people worship the Lord. We're trying to engage and worship ourselves, and serve the worship team and serve the pastors. This is the things that we've agreed on, arrived at, that's our best way to do it. So thank you guys. I so appreciate working and serving with you guys, and thank you for taking the time to watch this, and hopefully this can help us as we go forward in the future.